to say that the superintendent and I spoke last week, or actually this week after Rick Scott's announcement, and I felt like that our teaching staff and our support staff and administration needed to know the progress toward meeting Governor Scott's announcement. And I also felt that it would be good to hear from board members in unison or individually right here in this room, that we talk about our experiences, disappointment or maybe happiness over this announcement. So at this time, Madam Superintendent.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Fisher, and board members. Thank you for being here today, and it's always a pleasure to talk about high student opportunities for our students to be college and career ready. I wanted to take just a minute, and we want to have some dialogue, but I wanted to bring you up to date on some additional information that I've received. But if you take a look at the executive order issued by the governor and the governor's letter to the chairman.
I think we have enough copies to share with the audience, or at least share with 2 people at a time.
Is the microphone?
If you have the little blue dot on it, should be on.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is.
And the letter to the chairman of the State Board of Education, there's some very important points that the governor makes in this and these.
The communicator is communicating. That's okay. It wasn't you I was speaking to. He's having a good time. Okay.
And a lot of the information in the meat is in the executive order when we go through it. But the governor highlights that his commitment to providing students with the highest academic standards so that we have an in-depth understanding of concepts in reading, writing, and mathematics. So he reinforces his commitment to having an educational system in Florida with that. In the letter to the chairman, he also states that in 2010, we, the State Board of Education, adopted Common Core state standards in English, language arts, and mathematics. And that was modeled after the Next Generation Sunshine State Standards. And he also states that the result has been the development of the highest academic standards that can move our students and teachers away from teaching to the test and toward a more independent analytical approach to reading, writing, and math. So he reinforces that in the letter. You will also notice he's going down through the letter, he brings up that it's important that we're going to provide our students with the highest academic standards and reject the intrusion from federal government. So in order to do that, there's 2 things he talks about in this letter. We have to demonstrate that we're committed to providing high academic standards, which our teachers are already working hard to implement. So my interpretation of this is that he's reinforcing that the standards that were adopted in 2000, the standards, and I'm talking the pure standards, that were adopted in 2010 were academically rigorous, and that we're continuing on that path right now. Now, he also goes on to say that we are rejecting the intrusion from the federal government. So next, it says, second, we need to make clear that implementing those standards, and I'm assuming that he's referring to the ones adopted in 2010, cannot come at the expense of Florida maintaining an independent control over those standards or protecting local control over decisions. To achieve these things, these are the things that are going to occur here in the upcoming weeks. He wrote a letter to Secretary Arnie Duncan ending Florida's fiscal agent relationship with the partnership, that's the PARCC assessment, because we were the fiscal agent for that, and that we're going to be selecting an assessment that best meets the needs of students in Florida. And And you will notice that they are taking the steps to put out to bid, or it's either an ITN, I believe, an intent to negotiate, for a new assessment system that is more customized, that fits Florida and is selected locally here in Florida rather than nationally. And that's what he says here. It's important that we select an assessment that best meets our needs.
Who does that? Who selects that?
That would be done on the state level, and I'm in the past it has been done by the Department of Education through their procurement efforts. In the past, they've also put committees together so that there's input from various stakeholder groups. That's what I can tell you from my past. Going forward, whether there will be a change to that or not, there is a procurement process they must follow, though, to do that because of the significant amount of that assessment would be.
And if I may stop you there, it states that PARCC will have the opportunity to apply.
It does. When you put,
and how can you say that if you feel that it's intrusive and it isn't the entity that we want?
That I can't answer, because I have the same question, because it is noted up here in the first part of the statement, but it's also clear that we're withdrawing as a fiscal agent as of right now, and that we're going to review all the options or opportunities for assessments, and a decision will be made for that. So to me, it's not clear cut that the PARCC assessment is 100% off the table. It is clear to me that we're going to be reviewing in the state of Florida all the assessment options, and that locally we'll select what's best for the system. So, but I understand what you just said, Ms. Fischer.
Because I had read this, when it first came out, and I'm thinking, okay, I understand, I agree with what you've done, but then why do you invite, is that something by state law, they have to invite any and everyone?
When you put that out there, you're posting it and people are submitting. And if you're doing an RFP or an RFQ or an ITN and an intent to negotiate, is people submit their proposals, and then you go through a process and you negotiate with those particular vendors to meet the needs and get the best price for that. So there's a specific process on an ITN.
And I would say that if I found that not appropriate for our state, I don't know. My understanding is, okay, this is a legal process and they have to do it, but in reviewing, surely everyone would take that into consideration, because I don't want to go through with the push to meet their standards one more time. And I would tell the board, and I'm stopping the superintendent, the one thing that has come to my attention since this announcement, number one, people are thrilled that we're not using PARCC, and number two, our staff says, what next? So I have a real hard time. The reason for today's meeting was to allay some fears so that we knew where the stable point is for our teaching staff and our administrators.
Exactly correct. And I believe you're right on the mark when you talk about the legal process. It is a legal process when you are, the procurement process here. So I'm not sure that anybody that wants to submit has the right to submit from my interpretation, but that's a legal question.
And then, sorry. And what is the time period? And what do we do in the meantime?
There are some time periods that are here, and I know I'm going back and forth between documents.
The only way to do that, and I'm so glad that you're speaking up. I'm so glad Rosanne is, because that's what we need to do today.
I think if I take you to the email from the Commissioner Stewart that I received, there is more of a clear picture of some timelines there. And there's some frequently asked questions, and here, I'm sorry, I didn't get to this right there.
Let's stop for 2 minutes. too.
That's
I
fine.
like it this small.
I think if you look at the enumerated items, this will give us a clearer picture. And I think this will alleviate some of the fears. If you look at the first question, it says, if we have the opportunity to comment on the current standards next month, so there's the clue to me that the month of October, there will be town hall meetings, they'll call them public hearings, and they will have a website set up for individuals, teachers, stakeholders, to go in and weigh in on our current Common Core State of Florida standards, the pure standards. But the question goes on to say, does that mean we change instruction for this year? The answer is no. The State Board of Education adopted the current standards in 2010. They are still in effect. So the instruction and assessment we have all planned for and are implementing during the 2013-14 school year will remain the same. So nothing has immediately changed. Anything that is referenced in the governor's order is for changes for the 14-15 school year, because that is when we we're slated to completely transition to all parts of Common Core and all parts of the assessment, which was going to be the PARCC assessment.
May I stop you there?
Mm-hmm.
Then, my question comes in is that this school system has spent a lot of money for curriculum that was designed to help students score well in the PARCC assessment. Was that a waste?
In my opinion, it is not a waste at this point in time, because the standards are still in place. Now, if the standards are completely set aside and a whole completely different set of standards come in that are not even related to these standards, then there is a possibility that some could be out of alignment.
This, each year we have a set amount to purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And my consideration is, and I'm saying this because you and I talked,
Mm-hmm.
there are still some texts that we don't have. There are still some areas that we need to get in from what we've ordered.
Mm-hmm.
I need to know the full amount, and then I think the governor needs to know the full amount that this county has spent in making sure that we met a criteria that will be changed in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
So that the DOE has some idea that we want to change, we want to follow, but at what expense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to know, for our teachers to know, that this year, what they are teaching in the classroom, what they're preparing our students for, and how they'll be assessed in the spring, it is still the FCAT 2.0. It is a blended curriculum. It is aligned to the current standards. So this year, we should not have a bump in the road this year. The question really comes is, what is going to occur next year with regards to the standards, with regards to the assessment that will be in place? And if you look further down, number 2, it says when the standards are reviewed in October, teachers and educators can comment on that, and it's a perfect opportunity for them to share feedback on these standards that will only make them better. So my understanding, and it's purely my understanding and processing what I'm reading, is that the standards that we have right now that are currently in place, that we've built our curriculum around, that we've built our professional development around, and purchase materials around, that they're going to get a lot of input from public and teachers and educators and everyone on and how to make those better. And then they will take all that input and they will look at that and then they will tweak our standards. But I'm anticipating that they will not be a complete overhaul, that they will make them what the state of Florida identifies as the appropriate need for our students without the intrusion of the federal government, is what I'm reading here. Further with the timeline, it says any changes made to the standards as a result of this comment period will be announced later in the fall. So I'm reading that those changes are slated to be made sometime between November 1st and, let's say, January, February, somewhere in that time period. I am reading that they're meaning this fall. And be acted upon by the State Board of Education, and then they'll go in effect to the 2014-2015. So it's very clear to me that we will have revised standards in 2014, 2015 that we will know about before the school year closes. Now, to go back to your statement, Ms. Fischer, how extensive the revisions are will determine how many things we'd have to change in curriculum and resources. It may be minimal, or it could be, we just don't know.
Did you have a plan and administration in your curriculum department to order more things?
We have an instructional materials budget that we get from the state, and we have a textbook adoption timeline, and they don't all come updated as they go, and we have some flexibility in this window of time that we order them. We had reading this year, elementary reading this year. Next year it's slated to be math. Math was just done a year or two ago. Well, we would normally be gearing up for math adoption right now. Well, I just talked with Dr. Doyle this morning and I said, let's put that on hold because I need to make sure that our math textbook adoption aligns to whatever the standards are going to be next year. So that kind of gets
That's exactly where I am. In thinking of everything, the concern of the staff that's implementing these standards, and then let's be real prudent in what we order, complete the order that we had out, get it in the hands of staff, but be prudent with any future orders because it is,
right.
Even with an enhancement, you would have to have support text for that enhancement.
Right. So we're not making any new purchases for other content areas. We're simply addressing completing the reading adoption that we currently have.
And for my board members' knowledge, I have sat on 3 adoption groups from Tallahassee under 2 different governors. And it is a long process, and that is another concern of mine, this quick turnaround. Is there going to be ample time for the public to look at the materials that are going to be presented to our students? Because in the other process, there was.
The best answer I can give to that, and it's not going to be an exact answer, based on the conversation the commissioner had with us as superintendent, her timeline was to get this all done because she told us by March we needed to know what we were doing at the, in the districts, because then that started the cycle of when we would be making some putting some procedures in place. If that timeline holds true, then the answer to your question is it will be close, but yes, we could do that. If it's later than that, then it does not give us much time to do that in the process that we've done before. It'll have to be a much more accelerated process. And again, it would matter how extensive the revisions are.
I need both my board members to chime in.
From the standpoint of the standards, and this is a curriculum issue for you,
Mm-hmm.
if this is your opportunity to speak to improvement on the standards. Do you have some in mind right this minute?
I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head. We do have some, our academic services department has looked at every single standard that they're prepared to provide input. We believe that our teachers need to have ample opportunity to provide input. Because I want to hear from them,
right.
Because they're the ones in the classroom every day using them and teaching them, and they know them backwards and forwards, along with our curriculum team. So I am going to get a lot of input from them, and their opinions are going to weigh very heavily once they do this.
And is that something that we would see as well? Because again, I couldn't even speak to what I would change in standards, you know what I mean?
Okay.
That those in the ground would do that.
Right. They'll be submitting those on this website, and we can go in there and look at those. And I won't know what every individual teacher submits because they'll do that, you know, from their own computer, go right to the website.
But have you had a pushback on Common Core standards
from the teachers? I have not had a overwhelmingly pushback. In fact, it's, you know, they've pulled some statistics around, and you know, it'll range anywhere from 60 to 70% of the teachers that favor Common Core. Now, you have to qualify that though, because the standards themselves, the pure standards themselves, I haven't had a lot of pushback on. A lot of the accountability requirements and the concern of the testing and not knowing what the test was going to look like, not knowing the structure of the test, not knowing if we had enough technology to do it because there was not going to be any paper and pencil. And a lot of the compliance requirements, I've gotten a lot of pushback on that.
Which is on the PARCC side.
Yes. Well, and on the accountability system, that side, the fact that we have some accountability requirements that attached to the evaluation where I'm being evaluated on students I didn't teach. You know, those have been the hot buttons, as they should be. You know.
But there's also a responsibility out there for all of your principals, because they're supposed to be the coach. They're supposed to be that literary coach of the entire system, and it is their little city. That's the way I look at it. So they need to be a very big part in this, and offering up information and noting so that they can transfer it on.
And you're exactly correct. Now, this document is going out to all our principals with them, because I want them to know that these questions, because they get asked these questions, I want that they have this information. I mean, those press releases go across the board in the Administrations Association. They get those by email, but they wouldn't have gotten these clarifying questions, and I have that written.
Is it okay to clarify, when you say later in the fall, if we're talking seasons, that would not be...
This fall.
I know this fall, but this fall would not be December.
I'm
It would be
interpreting...
I don't know when it's October, November when the season changes.
Yeah.
The winter.
December 21st is the change of winter, the date for winter. We just went into fall.
I'm interpreting...
December 21st.
So by December, would it be okay to clarify by December then?
That's my interpretation. But I also know that sometimes it takes a little longer than they anticipate. And I know that the commissioner has used decisions need to be made no later than March. Now, is that on standards? Is that on the test? You know, those kinds of things to give us ample time. But October to me is fall. November to me is fall. December is winter.
Right.
But
and I have to say, on these first documents that we received, I thought they were much more stringent about the Common Core standards than what we've recently received, which says go ahead with your type of Common Core, but we want to improve it even more. I did not get that from the first documents that we received.
No, and I want to, so this was the letter from the commissioner.
I interrupted you before you got to three.
You're fine, and you're going to see that in number 3, it just says that they're going to go out we're withdrawing as fiscal assistant. At the same time, we continue to consider PARCC among potential options while we conduct a competitive procurement so we can review every option available and select the best test for Florida. So then they talk about the public hearings and the website and the email address. So I go back to the governor's letter to the chairman of the State Board of Education, and I want to draw your attention to item 4 in his list to achieve these things. Because he's directed the Commissioner of Education to, I'm sorry, this is item 2, to initiate a process to obtain public input and to identify those. This process should be completed with no less than 3 public meetings throughout the state prior to November 1st. So that means the month of October, those 3 public hearings, that website will be active. Then at that, there will be resulting actions by the State Board of Education to clearly codify the Florida plan standards. So if I'm reading this, I'm reading that we will shift from Common Core to the Florida plan standards.
And that's what I read.
Mm-hmm. Now,
And Alan Winslow's in the back. He and I talked about this just a little bit, very little bit. But let me say, that's the way I read it.
and when you put this together, one interpretation is that we're going to start with our 2010 standards that we already have in place. We're going to put them out for everybody to weigh in on, give input, make suggestions. That the month of October, by November 1st, they will gather up all that input, they will look at it, and then they will present recommendations to the State Board of Education on the new Florida plan standards. And
So
I
Common Core goes away.
And it's
the
warm right now.
title, Common Core, goes away. I believe you will see our current now this is my opinion, that you will see our current standards revised, updated, and enhanced and made better to fit Florida's needs. So I can't tell you that there will be 100% change. There might be 50% revisions. There could be 10% revisions. It's whatever is, because he does reference that our current standards that are in place are pretty rigorous. But here's the part that I think is
Here comes Pam.
that is important. And again, I'm interpreting this as I read, putting the pieces together, and I could be totally wrong. But when you look at paragraph 4, it says, immediately codify through the State Board of Action that Florida will not adopt we got to read the words here, Common Core State Standards Appendices, Common Core State Standards Test Exemplars, pieces of literature, informational text, poetry, etc., Common Core Sample Performance Tasks, Common Core Samples of Student Writing, and designed high school math courses, which all should remain the decisions of local school boards. So I can just tell you my interpretation, because you have the pure standards, and then you have exemplars, and you have these recommended literature pieces, you have performance tasks, you have samples of writing, you have all these additional things that provide linking the standards to the PARCC assessment.
That's right.
I read this, that the PARCC assessments come off, that these added and linkages that were very controversial, those have come off the table. We're not allowed to do those. But right now we have in place the pure standards, and those are what are being reviewed. That's how I interpret what is being said.
So the state of Florida then will come up with the exemplars that is a part of the Florida Common Core.
That it would all be
Florida
state,
plan standards.
yes, it would all be driven by the Florida plan standards.
There's nothing common about us.
Yeah.
I'm good with all that.
I think they want to just get rid of the words Common Core and PARCC, and
I think it's important to remember that when you laid the pure standards side by side, there was a lot of commonality with the next generation and the new standards that adopted in 2010. It's when you had all this added things on that it got to be very concerning. But all of that, that's why I said they're stepping back and they're reviewing, they want all the input, that type of thing. So I don't know how much revision will be made, but I know that we will not have those pieces in, that I just read in
Definitely not.
I mean, that was just made very clear. There's no, to me, there's no question of whether we're using the Common Core appendices. We're not. The paragraph 5, it talks about that the State Board of Education will take action for the Florida English Language Arts and Mathematics standards to be used in classrooms, and then on student assessments for the 14-15 school year. So to go through this revision process, we will have a new Florida plan standard for English, language arts, and mathematics that will be taught in our schools next year and directly aligned with whatever assessment is chosen. And it says here, after December 31st, 2013, continue to periodically review, accept public comment on, and revise Florida's Sunshine State standards as necessary for future school years. That is a little confusing to me. I'm not sure what exactly that means in action. I know what the words, I understand every word I just read. I'm just not sure what that transfers into action.
Periodically review. I mean, are they going to do it quarterly, biannually, annually? I mean, we just don't know.
Well, and then we're using Florida Sunshine State standards because we had Florida Sunshine State standards. Then we went to the next generation Sunshine State standards. Then we went to Common Core. So I'm just not sure whether we're really referring to the 2010 or previous. I'm not sure. And it may
they may not be sure yet either.
It may be that they want to look at the standards that we've had in the past to say some of these were really, really good and we need to keep those. So that may be that they're doing a very inclusive review of all the standards that we've had over the past 10 years. And that's quite possible. But that's processing out loud. I think the other thing that you want to look at in the executive order, this is very directive and very prescriptive, and there are some things that I'd like to point out to you. Yes.
Which one?
This one.
That has the big state of Florida on the top, that I believe are very positive things in moving forward. I think when you read the first page, I think that's pretty informative. It's on the second page where it talks about state standards assessments. And that's where they establish the open process to procure Florida's next assessment. And you can see the criteria listed there. So as they go to secure and identify and select the assessment that will be used in 14-15, here is the criteria that he has outlined that will be used during that phase. You'll also see that in the second part of that the State Board of Education, the recommendation to terminate Florida's role of the fiscal agent of PARCC has to occur here at one of their upcoming meetings no later than December 31st.
What does that mean, the fiscal agent?
My word, there is a consortium of states. I don't know that consortia is how they officially call them, but it's a grouping of states that started the Common Core and PARCC arena. And this was back, what was it, 2008-9, somewhere in that time period where all this started. And when it was established, they came together on this initiative, and I don't know whether there was any funding or grants, but fiscal agent means that you're coordinating it for the group of states. So Florida acted as, we kind of took the lead in that back in the day when it was first being established and coordinated that whether there were any grant dollars to start the initiative or I don't know. I don't know enough about it at that point in time, but that's what a fiscal agent is.
But weren't there counties that were given money to help write the standard in Florida, like including us?
Yes, you are correct. In Florida, under the Race to the Top initiative, under Race to the Top, that initiative was to have performance pay. It was to have standardized assessments that were linked to performance pay, have the value added model system. That all was requirements and deliverables under the Race to the Top initiative. And
it's not tied to this?
Well, some people interpret that it's intertwined and integrated. Race to the Top had set deliverables that we had to do, and then Florida then came in a year later after Race to the Top, and we had some legislative action that required performance pay, required value-added model, and they actually, the legislative action expedited it to be implemented faster than what Race to the Top did. Because we had 4 years in Race to the Top to develop our performance pay system, and we're still in that. We're coming to the last year of that. To put together our value added, to have all our assessment tests for each course, and then Senate Bill 736 came in and made it due a year earlier. So that's where all of those dollars came from, because all the states we divided up, and not all the states, all the counties, we divided up, and we had work teams with people and teachers that were writing assessments, and then they vetted them, they tested them, you know, they went through that whole vetting process to validate them.
How does that assessment that has happened, how is that effective? And how are the performance?
Well, that's in question. So I can't tell you how it's effective. It's now up in the air. We haven't administered those tests because they're still in the development and vetting phase. They're all to be done for the 14-15 school year.
I think it's really needed to be said here that this county conformed at each step as required at the time, whether it was Dr. Moxley in place or a former superintendent. We moved as was prescribed. This is a change and an immediate halt to what we were doing at that time.
And Mr. Mathias?
And once again, before I go any further, this was done at the state level, not at our level. We just complied.
To give you just another clarifying point, with those assessments that we talked about, there were state Race to the Top dollars, because districts got their allocation of Race to the Top, and then the state had an allocation. And there were, I'm going to call them like mini grants that went to different districts to facilitate the development of several of those course assessments, because that was the PARCC or the FCAT, they only hit the core academic subject areas. Common Core is only language arts and math. So the other areas, like you have French, you have Spanish, you have all the foreign languages, you have elective courses. We have a lot of elective academic courses that don't have a state assessment. So those are all those assessments we were having to write and design, because you can't have an evaluation for a teacher who teaches non-core courses and not have an assessment, because then you can't measure that performance piece.
Right.
So that was all due to be done by the 14-15 school year. In some ways, I don't see how that's impacted, because that Race to the Top, those deliverables are still in place. We still will have courses that are non-core, because even Common Core standards are simply for those core academic areas.
But the inequity of Senate Bill 736 was that it pushed us into a position of assessing teachers before the matrix was developed. Are you saying that it will be developed by 14-15 for all courses?
Well, I can't tell you that they will, because people are just really pushing and pushing and pushing. It's an enormous task. It's been an enormous task, and it's it's supposed to be, they are working and working and working. We've got committees, we've got teachers, we've got people on those committees, and they're working as hard as they can, but they're running against time, frankly.
But the assessment isn't written, and they have to be assessed. That's not equitable.
You are correct, and that is
Okay.
why, nope, you're right on the money there, and that's why every year, the Central Florida School Boards Coalition, the Superintendent's Association, I believe FSBA, the School Boards Association, that's why they keep asking, let's do it right, let's get it right. Let's not hurry this through and not have it fully vetted, because that's worse than not having anything, that if you have it and it's not correct, and that let's take the time to do it right. So they've asked to have it pushed back a year so it can be done right. I don't know where that'll go. That's why I said it's up in the air a little bit.
Looking at these different points under Section 1 state standards, I think I have some concerns. One, it's C. Ensures that testing time for students is not significantly different from current assessment. Well, we've already talked about our teachers, how much time is spent testing. So if we're already spending 25%, and then the criticisms that we've had over the years is teachers teach to the test, referring to FCAT. So one, I just think about, okay, are we going to a new version of FCAT and calling it something else? And I know you can't answer that, but that's a question that comes up here. And then you look at E, measure student mastery of the standards taught, including comparability to other states. How are we going to compare ourselves to other states if we're going to have our own assessment tool, and then they're going to have their various assessment tools? We're not going to, well, looking at this, I don't see how we're going to get there to be able to compare ourselves.
Well, and I want to say this, I think parents will be, and it's off this topic, but parents will be so very happy when an A means an A, and a B means a B, and an F means an F. We have veered so much with all of these assessments and end-of-course exams and FCATs that parents, one day they think they have the brilliant child, and the next day they think, oh my goodness, I need to go get a tutor.
But I'm not sure with this that we're going to get to what you just described. That's what we want to get to. But I'm just wondering, now that we're at the 9th, 10th hour, quickly going to turn something around within the next month to have a new assessment tool maybe by spring, because in class, new school year starts in August, and at the end of that year they've got to be doing the new testing. I think we're now in a situation where time is not going to be on our side, and we may just push something through because we have to have something in place, and I'm not sure we're going to be in a better position than we are now.
And those are things I think we're going to be stay tuned.
Exactly.
With. I know that, you talked about E with the measures, student mastery, comparability to other states. For many years we administered the NRT, and that allowed us to make it was a national comparison, right. But states still had local control over their own standards, and that was, and we got away from that because the state stopped paying for it, and districts had to pick it up, and it was a cost that districts just couldn't afford to do. Now Hillsborough, they still do. They administer the FCAT and they administer the NRT. They pay for it out of their budget because they used it to anchor the FCAT to see where they were in alignment. And in some areas they were, in some areas they found that they weren't. But that I don't have their data. I don't know that. I can only state what has been reported in state meetings. But the NRT, the ACT, and the SAT are the three national tests that I know that have been given over the years that districts have used that'll give you that comparability to other states without being a national assessment, one size fits all. With that, so.
But then we're still having to look at, okay, this is the NRT result, this is our Florida standard test results, this is the ACT results, this
Yeah.
is the
And there goes the
SAT results,
parent
and there goes
Yeah.
the confusion. And I know even with the NRT, with regards to graduation rates and the others, there's not just one that says we're an A school,
Right.
we're this, we're that, it's dependent
Right.
upon which study that you're looking at as to the results, and then you pick the best one that makes you look the best.
And I think as a board, we should be able to convey that in these open meetings, that we're willing to follow the directive, and we embrace the directive, but please make an A across the board.
But at the end of the day, for the child that is going to college, it is the SAT or the ACT that gets them to college.
Sure.
Why isn't the Board of Colleges, that they administer the SAT, right? Why aren't they involved in this process, so an A means an A? You know,
I can't answer that.
Or, I mean, but it seems like-
But I agree. I mean, we use the ACT. I mean, we give the, just like there's the PSAT, we have the plan for the ACT, there's the PSAT for the SAT. You're giving it to 9th and 10th graders. We do that here because that gives us, we use it as a tool to measure where our students are when they're entering high school with it. And we have found that to be a very valuable tool, so.
So we already have that in place.
So
Seems
why
like to
aren't
me,
we
that's
using
why are we using it?
Yeah, I agree.
And the ACT and the SAT, there are concordance scores. So but there's some rules and statute about it. If I take the FCAT and I fail it, and I don't get it, and it's a graduation requirement, and I can, at a later time, after I've taken the FCAT, I can't just say I'm going to take the ACT and the SAT and not the FCAT. You have to take the FCAT. If you fail it, there are concordance scores that if you take and pass the ACT or the SAT at this score or above, then it will substitute and count for meeting graduation requirements. And we do have students that do that.
Yeah.
We do.
The superintendent, no, I'm sorry, it was not the superintendent, I don't believe, but you and I attended a coalition meeting. You were vice chair of the coalition at the time, and a gentleman came, I believe at Mr. Wheeler's request, and presented alternative testing and advocated for just what Bill is talking about. Do you remember that?
I
It was
do.
probably March of last year.
I'm trying to think I'd have to think who that
If
was.
you could look back in your minutes for us
Okay.
and bring that back to the board's attention, because I think what he presented that day would be very good for us to review.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Was it with you?
Um,
Or B. Grassel? I can't remember.
I remember something, and I'll go back and look through whatever notes I have. I remember there was a group of board members that got, who it was, I think it was Mr. Roach, and remember Mr. Wheeler had a discussion about that, and about something changing.
Yes, because that was the meeting that you attended, because then you two then went on to, to Disney for the principal of the
Okay.
year.
But it was a gentleman that came in at the request,
Rick,
and I know Rick Roach.
Yeah.
No, he brought him in.
He brought the guy in.
But it just-
I'll find out.
It just seems to me at the end of the day, when we speak about an A being an A, that a student that has a 4.0 in our schools should be able, as a correlation on his SAT, be at that same level going in and applying for a university.
Right.
I mean, that's your benchmark,
Right.
I think.
Right. No, and I agree with you. I agree with you.
And I think,
Sorry.
no, I'm just dovetailing off of what you said. I think that's the way it should be. But that's the beauty of this meeting today, that we're beginning to think collectively of how we want to see this plan come about. You know, if we're going to enhance what we have, let's don't make it even more complicated. Let's enhance it by improving the quality of the presentation and the topics.
Well, and I would like to see us, and this is great that you called this meeting this quickly, but us be proactive and get our Lake County recommendations out in writing. Because we've seen on more than one occasion states just doing something on their own.
Well, and going on to H, requires technology parameters that are defined and can be supported, including appropriate accommodation of exceptional students.
Mhm.
You know, the technology piece has still been one that we have been struggling with. And so wondering, what does that mean with this new testing, whatever this new testing is going to be? And is it going to have to be 50% online, 100% online? You know, cost factor,
Well-
the cost factor of that, making sure we have the infrastructure in place.
Well, and that's, I don't know what kind of structure. Now, I know they've gathered input from the districts to see, okay, how much bandwidth do you have, what's your Wi-Fi capability, the number of computers you have, the number of handheld devices. They've gathered all that information. But see, the PARCC was slated to roll out and not have any paper and pencil, and that just, I mean, we're not ready for that, and without a huge expense.
I think we
And
gave
so
one
that's
staff member
where-
some job security.
So that's the
If we
question
don't burn
here,
the
we're
job
going to be
out.
able to have paper and pencil.
The commissioner did reference that,
Okay.
but because she's sensitive to that, she understands that, so I don't know what percentage it'll be there. I think there's a couple other things in his order. There's a section 2 on student data security. He's very specific about making sure that there is a review done of the data security and protocols and operating procedures, that there is a prevention of any unintended use or release of student information. They talk a little bit about making recommendations for a needed rule and legislative change to safeguard the privacy of our students' data, and there's a timeline there. And that it also goes on to ensure that there's protections that the release of students' education records without the written consent of a student or parent to any individual, that there are safeguards that will not occur. I think the next section on student accountability system is where we have had the most concern in making things that are stable, because the one thing that we've said all along is that the accountability systems and the formulas change every year. And, you know, over the past 3 years, we've had approximately 39 changes to the system. And we had changes again this year. And we have some changes again going into this year. And we'll share those with you. But again, you know, the system, we never know where the target is, and it keeps moving and changing, and that becomes problematic. But so the governor says that here he is talking about that the commissioner shall recommend to the state board that only specific changes outlined herein be made to the school accountability system. So he's pretty much stating that there really shouldn't be any changes made to the accountability system to keep it stable, other than what is outlined here. And that because we're going to be transitioning to the new, and there's that word again, Florida Plan for Education Accountability. So again, that's something we'll be waiting to see. I think we have the title of what it's going to be.
It's
Florida
not called
Plan.
A Florida Plan.
Yeah.
So
That's a new term.
FPEA, let's see, what is that?
Yeah.
The acronyms from that big.
But if you go on into the school accountability system, you'll see the changes during this period shall be limited to the inclusion of the U.S. history and the course exam that was scheduled to take place, and other technical changes directed by statute, and of course any emergency rules meant to ensure a stable transition. So again, there appears to be a desire here to have some stability to our accountability system. That is certainly a step in the right direction, but we still remain a little concerned about stability.
I'm not clear on that. Changes during this period shall be limited to inclusion of the U.S. history and the course exam?
Yes.
What?
Okay.
Please explain.
Right now in our high schools, the biology and the course exam, geometry and algebra are already included in the accountability system. They're already there, points are given, you know, all of that on the grade calculation of a school for a high school. The U.S. history is slated to come on board next year. Right now, it's field tested. The students take it, and they're field testing it, but next year it counts. So next year, we were slated that our accountability, the school grading formula for high schools, will now have points and student performance measured in this area, whereas this past year it did not, because U.S. history was not in there yet.
Let me ask you this, the students who are taking AP U.S. history, AAP Trig, AP, will they still have to take the end of year course exam and the AP exam?
Their AP exam is their end of course exam.
Okay, well, I mean, I just wanted to
I'm
know
saying
if that's
crossing
going
as I go.
forward,
Yeah.
you know, because that AP exam is from what they learn from the beginning of the course to the end of the course, which is the same thing, in my opinion, as an end of year course exam.
And it's been my experience that that's been waived dependent upon the grade average. Yeah.
Well, but
And I'll get you the exact language on that.
The AP exam and then the end of year course exam, the same subject.
Bumps it up to 50% of our time testing.
Right.
Right. Well, and you bring up a good point, and this is kind of an aside, but it fits in the conversation. 8th graders. We have a lot of 7th and 8th graders that are accelerating, so they're ready to handle a more accelerated math. So they will go in and take Algebra 1. And that has an end of course exam, and it is a high school credit. In the past, they had to take the 8th grade FCAT or the 7th grade FCAT in math and take the Algebra 1 end of course exam. And we kept saying, you're double testing students. And they're not in a regular math class, they are in an algebra class. So the state this past year said, okay, you can have your students take one or both. So if they're in Algebra 1, then they can take the Algebra 1 and a course exam, and you don't have to have them take the 8th grade FCAT math. And we had a choice. And so we were all asked, are you going to test your 8th graders in both arenas, your 7th graders in both arenas, or are you going to just have them take the Algebra 1 and then they're excluded from the other? I did not believe that you double test students. That does come with a statistical price, if you will. And we talked about it at great length, and we opted to do what was right by students. The problem with that is, throughout the state, some districts tested all their 8th graders in 8th grade math, and then had the students that took Algebra 1 do their Algebra 1 test. Now, as far as the student is concerned, for their promotion or their high school credit for passing that course, they get the whichever scores the best. So they're not penalized if one's low and the other one's high. They get the credit. But their scores go into the formula in both arenas for the school's grade. Okay? So you've got the accelerated students in Algebra 1. You've got the accelerated students from Algebra 1 also in your 8th grade FCAT scores. In our arena, where we did not make them double test, we have our accelerated students in Algebra 1, and we have every student in the traditional 8th grade math curriculum, they're in the FCAT scores. So we didn't get the students that were in both areas. So we might not have had the same number of points as a school that double tested. So that we're looking at that right now. But we felt it was right by students. The only other thing I wanted to point out here is C on the 3rd page. The Commissioner of Education shall immediately recommend to the State Board of Education to resubmit Florida's Elementary and Secondary Act ESEA waiver and make it clear that Florida will not comply with terms involving federal overreach into the handling of ELL and ESOL student achievement measures in our school's accountability system. That's a lot.
I don't even know what those two
Okay.
stand for.
We have English language learners, students that come in and speak other languages, and we have an ESOL, those two terms. We have right now, there's been an ongoing dialogue back and forth with the U.S. Department of Education and the state of Florida. We believe that to acquire proficiency in the language, the English language, it takes a student that is a non-English speaking student more than a year. The waiver was requiring us to include students after just the first year in the regular accountability system, and they had to show the same proficiency in English written standardized tests. And the language wasn't acquired to proficiency. And we believe, this was a big state discussion, this was back and forth, that it takes 2 to 3 years for students to have a better grasp of the English language, to be able to take that standardized test in English. The students may know the content, but the language barrier, and this is an issue in all districts, but there are some districts that it is a higher percentage of ELL or ESOL students. But it has a significant impact on them.
What does ESOL mean?
English as a second language. And so what happens? I'm sorry?
It was oral.
Oh, okay.
The O part. The O part, yeah.
So what this is saying is that we believe that the federal government shouldn't be telling us how to handle these in our accountability system, that we need to do what's right for students. So we actually, that is a very positive step to doing what's right for students as well. So that, I believe, takes us through those documents. So,
will that compound us in receiving funding? I mean, will we lose, not compound, but will that be a negative in receiving funding?
I can't answer that because I don't know how they're negotiating
It would
that.
seem to me that it might be.
I believe it might have an impact on our title dollars.
And yet we're still going to have to provide the surplus, is what I'm reading also.
I don't know how that will fall out.
Board members, I think this is the most expansive and complete statement that I've seen in education in a long, long time, or if ever, to where it was backed up with supportive documents, where it was copied to everyone, and it came as a surprise. I asked the superintendent, how long have you known this? She said, maybe a few minutes more than you have. It just wasn't something that was handed out, and I believe you had a conversation with the Commissioner of Education, and there was not an indication that something of this magnitude was coming out. We did have one public comment.
May I ask one thing?
Yeah, sure. And then I need to let Vance speak.
Yeah, and I want him to, but this one, that's what I mean. Why do you think, or can we say then to the public that Common Core standards are going away, and we are building the Florida plan standards?
I'm having a hard time answering your question directly, not because I don't want to, but because it depends on how people interpret what you just said, and let me explain myself. In my mind, it's fair to say that the current adopted standards in the state of Florida that are based on Common Core are being thoroughly reviewed by the stakeholders in the state of Florida, and input will be gathered and from everybody, and that they will be revised, and the Florida plan standards will be correct. I think that's a fair statement.
I just want to what to say.
Well, you know,
Because, and here's my hesitation of why I'm sorry I didn't mean to.
No.
That my hesitation in saying Common Core is out is because it is possible that our existing standards may have very little revisions to them. That's, I just don't know. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that's the unknown. So that's why I'm hesitant to answer the question that way.
I get it.
And my statement is that I hope that the standards that we receive are rigorous but clear and have a quality that can be implemented, because if it is an immense change, then you're talking once again of helping staff, getting them trained, getting parents knowledge about what they're going to be receiving. A big issue. And I agree with Bill. Just let us know where we are, because we are the board that goes out and talks with everyone. I think to say to me that the Common Core enhancements are gone is definitely true, because that states that in there. But the core of academic work that we have is going to remain and be enhanced. I didn't say
With
common.
our own standards.
With our own standards, yes. And those standards were good, but it was when you added the rest of it. I know that Mr. Riker spoke repeatedly about the federal intrusion to information on children, and I think that it's a very good thing that that's been struck. And I appreciate you speaking to that several times in open meetings, and it's difficult to get up and say that. So, at this point, Rosanne, honey, I want you to talk.
Well, the only last comment that I would like to make, because there are changes that are going to be made, it's going to take time to change these. We may have to do some professional development with our staff, that the legislature will look at ensuring that we have the appropriate dollars to go along with doing, you know, what is right. Because if it becomes another unfunded mandate, it's going to make things very difficult.
Well, and at some point in time, unfunded mandates need to be entitled not doable. And we have to say that. We just cannot continue to accept the unfunded and then be held accountable for them. And if they're going to do that, then they're going to have to step aside with the FEFP formula, because we just don't get the money to do it, no matter how you look at it. If I look at other states across the United States, they get much more per child than we do, but they don't have a statewide formula that limits. So,
I think it's important to remember, and I know as educators and superintendents, we want the rigorous standards, because the ultimate goal and where we feel our purpose is to graduate students that are college and career ready, bottom line. And the only thing we're asking is that if the measurement of student performance is set here, and we're glad to have it way up here, but then let's set it and let's have a stable system, and everybody knows how you're going to be measured, and let's then get on with measuring, and then we have ways to see where we are, and that accountability needs to be in place. It's just that this constant revolving door and change and here and there and putting things in place before you have all the parts, that's when the unfairness and the inequities come. And that's what happens
right now.
Yeah. And that's where I sense the frustration is with our teachers and I'm sure parents and students, and that's the frustration.
Yeah.
Man, doesn't work. Van Shokum, write a blog, fiscalrangers.com. After getting all these documents and listening to this discussion, I want to thank you, Dr. Moxley, because this really fleshes out a lot of things that beyond just dropping out of PARCC. To me, the statements that they're going to drop the appendices and the other things that are in Common Core is a major factor of dissension among a lot of people, because there was questionable documents and recommendations for books to use and everything else that were in there that antagonized a lot of people. And so by starting from scratch, I think Florida is going to do very well. One of the issues they said was that modifying the standards, that school districts could do up to 15% modification. And it isn't clear to me whether that standard is being dropped, because you're still in Common Core. You just dropped out of PARCC, and you have that letter that says we're dropping out these other things. So I don't know if they're doing that, but what it implies to me is that you can then create additional standards here. You're not limited at 15%, or may not be, but in addition, but that 15% that they said school districts could add was not going to be on the test. So, but now the state and the districts can come up with components they want to add back in, and they could define that that's in the new tests. That's a significant difference, because if you're teaching to a test, as teachers will, because pay may depend on it, you can add back things maybe that have been dropped, or like history requirements and other things. So to me, that's a significant thing to look for. Yeah, I noticed there's in here, it talks about the 2010 standards, and they don't want to use the word Common Core anymore. I think maybe you ought to use it until you get something new. Otherwise, it confuses people, and it looks like you're trying to avoid, you're just making a marketing name change.
Rebranding, I think, is what
Yes,
they're all
yes. And the risk of the new assessment provider, to me, is things like happened in Texas. They turned down Common Core and they adopted C-Scope, which turned out to be an even worse one that people got aggravated over, and they killed that. The parents were able to kill that in Texas because it was even more skewed towards a bias and towards one political spectrum. And the ACT and the SATs are run now by the guy who helped set up Common Core, and he has aligned it. So now you're going to have to look at, or Florida is going to have to look at, he skewed these things to match Common Core, and now how's it going to affect your students if you have different standards? And then finally, just kind of a question that wasn't clear to me. You talked about the ELL students, and if they are rejecting the federal rules for that, does that mean then you would have the ability to not include those kids in the accountability standards for 2 or 3 years until you met that standard that you believe is outbound?
Not necessarily. Those test scores are reported, but the
because that drags down the school rankings and everything.
Yeah. Before, the state of Florida had a way that they included all student achievement, but they balanced it to make sure that students were not being unfairly penalized, or schools weren't being unfairly penalized.
Yeah, to me that's a big factor.
It's a huge factor. And then when when the No Child Left Behind and all of that was being discussed up in Washington, states submitted this waiver process, and as one of the requirements to get the waiver, you had to meet certain standards, and it was making it what we believed unfair to students.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, just because the school rankings, in my belief, are always distorted heavily, and you almost need to have another category and say, we do here with English speaking, and over here, here's the rankings for non-English speaking, and show progress in each of them independently.
And the personality of every school is different.
And I think that the best example goes back to the graduation rate, because if you remember, we had the Florida graduation model, and that graduation model included our graduation rate based on a standard traditional high school diploma. It was based on a special diploma, and it was based on students that got the GED exit option, meaning they passed the GED, but they also had other requirements they had to meet. The federal graduation rate went in and said, we don't, you're excluding your special diplomas, you're excluding GED exit options. It's only that traditional model. And that's okay if everything's all equal, but then when you go from state to state, there's different things on how they define what's a special diploma, what is, you know, and then all of a sudden you had all these things that were going through that factor. But board members, all my comments today, I want to qualify that it is Susan's opinion reading through this and what I have gotten from different conference calls, and that there's a lot of things in here that are interpretations of what we think and what we've been told, but I certainly don't have anything exact with it, and I really appreciate the dialogue. And one of my other suggestions that we might want to consider is if you want to put together Lake County's recommendations on this, that we will need to have a work session to do that. And I would suggest that, you know, I put in for 3 minutes of the legislative delegation, just talk about, you know, education in general. It might be wise to have a board member also include a 3-minute card, because we have, you know, because you could talk 3 minutes just on this topic alone. So that's just something I suggest. I'm working on our platform, you know, putting your ideas and what you've had in one document that I always give to them. But that 3 minutes goes by awful fast.
I want to just make a statement, and it's kind of, Dr. Moxley said how she feels, and I want everybody to know in here that I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to listen to the Rikers, and other people are in this audience, Vance, Mr. Winslow, all of the individuals, the parents that came to the meetings that we had on Common Core, because that gave Kyleen Fischer a heads up to what the public wanted. I think that maybe this board was more aware of what the public wanted than the state was, thanks to your vigilance, and I appreciate that. It is incumbent upon me as a board member to reflect the common thought in my community. And I started doing that thanks to your comments. We also not only have to reflect, but we have to be responsible. And today's meeting to me was a responsible step to take when we had something that's unparalleled to my 20 years of investment in education in the state of Florida, and it's right here in front of me. This is an overnight change that I've never seen before, and I want us to step to it. I want us to be appropriate, but it's going to be really incumbent upon this board to be very vocal at these community and local meetings. I know for a fact that this week I have already, on my own dollar, made my accommodations for the Florida School Boards Association meeting. I think this one not only has a requirement for ethics, but should have a requirement for every board member in the state of Florida to be there, because this is big news, and this is big business, and we're telling the federal government, bow out. We're telling the federal government we want different accommodations. We have never done that before that I can think of. We've always, once again, tried to do what we were told to do. Now we're telling other people what to do. What a change in education. So I thank the board members that could be here. I need to tell you that Dr. Howard told me immediately that he had appointments arranged for today, and Ms. Stivender has family issues that are extreme. So the 2 members that aren't here are not invested, they're not concerned, but they had other commitments. So Rosanne, and I like what we're doing. I think it's high time that we were able to say what we wanted to do with our county, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I appreciate the meeting today, going through this. I think we have a lot more questions than we have answers for, but I think it's a great start. I do want to let everybody know that We have the workshop meeting on Monday, and I will be out of state and unable to attend. And so I just wanted to tell you why I'm not there. This is the fifth Monday, we usually don't always have a
That's
meeting.
true. That is
And
true.
I had made this arrangements to go to a professional conference many months ago.
Well, I hope you enjoy it, but bring everything back like you do with your consortium over in Orlando. I appreciate that.
Sure.
I would like to say I will be there because I have no life. But with Rosanne here, and she's really our representative to the legislative delegation. And I would encourage this to be something you consider speaking about. Also, which is very important to me, is that we speak about the Florida statute 1/6.23, which is hazardous conditions.
Yep.
That we should be, that
Most
in my
definitely.
opinion, we should be speaking about that. And the statute that deals with establishing the parental responsibility zone. And specifically
That's
two
a lot,
miles.
3 minutes too.
You can do it.
You can hand out papers. I'll be there to hand your papers out.
Okay.
One of the things I did want to say, and the superintendent and I spoke about it this morning, we will be adding on transportation to Monday's workshop.
Perfect.
Correct?
Yes, yes,
Expect a long afternoon.
I have one.
I gotta be with Rosanne.
You cannot go with Rosanne.
I have one item that has come up that requires board direction on. That I wanted to make sure. It's unique.
It certainly is.
It's very unique, and we only have one situation like that in the county. And I want to make sure that we are carrying out the wishes of the board.
To my district. So, we're unique. We're independent, we're unique. Madam Superintendent, I thank you very much. Patty, I thank you very much. I want to congratulate everybody that's in the audience for having the stamina to sit through this and for having the courage to come. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks. We are adjourned.